Don't, someone might see, but the rancher did it anyway, and the whole town lost their minds. To anyone passing by, it might look ordinary, just a cluster of barns, a few grazing cows, and the old farmhouse where Jacob had grown up. But there was something about Jacob that always caught the attention of the townspeople, though they could never quite put their finger on it. He was quiet, almost too quiet. Unlike other ranchers who liked to chat and share stories, Jacob kept to himself. He worked hard from dawn until dusk, tending to his land, repairing fences, feeding the animals, and fixing anything that broke. The ranch was his life, and he poured his heart into every corner of it. From a distance, you could see Jacob moving with careful precision. He walked slowly across the fields, checking each cow and inspecting every corner of the pasture. His hands were calloused, his clothes worn but neat, and there was a steady determination in his movements. Children in the town often tried to peek over the fences to see what he was doing, whispering to each other about his mysterious ways. "Why doesn't he ever come to town?" they would ask. "Why does he always keep to himself?" Their parents would usually smile and shake their heads. Jacob was harmless, they said, just a private man with his own ways. Jacob's mornings began before the sun rose. He would step outside the farmhouse in worn boots, taking a deep breath of the cool morning air. The smell of hay, damp soil, and fresh grass filled his senses. He always carried a small thermos of coffee with him, which he sipped slowly as he walked through the pastures, checking each cow and calf. Every animal on his ranch was important to him, and he treated them with patience and care. If a calf was sick or a cow was struggling to give birth, Jacob would spend hours helping, making sure everything was perfect. His attention to detail was unmatched, and even the oldest ranchers in town often admired his dedication, even if they didn't say it aloud. Despite his quiet life, Jacob had a curious mind. While other ranchers were satisfied with routines, he spent his evenings in the barn experimenting with small projects. The barn was a place full of old tools, scraps of metal and wood, but also filled with possibilities. Jacob loved to tinker. He would take broken machinery apart and try to fix it, sometimes staying up late into the night under the dim light of a lantern. Sparks would fly as he worked with metal, and the smell of oil and sawdust filled the air. Sometimes he would sit on a stool, scratching his head, thinking hard about the next step, muttering to himself in quiet concentration. To Jacob, these experiments were more than hobbies. They were a chance to learn, to imagine, and to create something better for his ranch and his town. The townspeople didn't know about this side of Jacob. They only saw him as the quiet rancher who never joined in town events and rarely spoke to anyone. Rumors often floated through the town like autumn leaves. "I saw him sneaking around the barn last night," one person would whisper. "Do you think he's building something?" another would reply. Some laughed at the idea, thinking Jacob was just eccentric. Others felt a mix of curiosity and suspicion, but Jacob didn't mind. He knew that what he was doing might seem strange to others, and he preferred it that way. There was no need to explain every detail of his life to people who didn't understand his vision. One hot summer day, things began to change. A stranger passing through town had noticed Jacob's barn from the road. Unlike the familiar neighbors who drove past every day, this person was new, and he stopped, staring curiously at the barn. He thought he saw a faint glow inside, even in the bright sunlight. That night, whispers started spreading quickly. People gathered at the local diner and talked in hushed tones about what Jacob might be hiding. "Something is going on over at Miller's," one man said. "I saw lights in the barn after dark." Another added, "Do you think he's building a new machine, or maybe something dangerous?" Laughter followed, but the curiosity was real. People couldn't help themselves. They wanted to know what Jacob was up to. Even the children were fascinated. They would sneak past the fence line, peering through cracks in the barn's wooden walls, hoping to catch a glimpse of Jacob's secret project. Sometimes they would see faint shadows moving and hear soft metallic clinks and hisses, but it was never clear enough to understand. To the children, it was magical, a real-life mystery that sparked their imagination. They would run back home, giggling and whispering about the magical barn and the secret rancher. Jacob noticed them occasionally, but he didn't scold them. Instead, he kept his focus on the work inside, determined to see it through before anyone else could interfere or misunderstand. Jacob's determination came from his belief that small changes could have big impacts. He had noticed the struggles of neighboring farms during the dry months. Crops would wither, and farmers would worry about survival. Jacob wanted to find a solution, but he knew it had to be his own idea, something that would make a difference and show that innovation didn't have to come from big cities or expensive experts. He worked quietly, drawing diagrams in old notebooks, testing tiny mechanisms, and adjusting designs over and over again. Each night, he would sit on a stool under the lantern light, tired but satisfied with the progress he had made. He believed that if he kept trying, he could create something extraordinary. The quiet town, meanwhile, was buzzing with speculation. The local shopkeeper mentioned seeing Jacob carrying unusual pieces of metal and tubing to the barn. Neighbors claimed they heard strange humming sounds at odd hours. The mayor, usually disinterested in small-town gossip, even asked a few questions, just to be informed. But Jacob continued his work undeterred, knowing that most people would not understand until the results spoke for themselves. He had always lived this way, focused on the work that mattered to him, letting the world notice later. Through it all, Jacob never lost his calm demeanor. He was friendly when spoken to, offering a nod or a small smile, but otherwise, he remained in his world of careful routines and creative experiments. He respected the people around him, their opinions, and even their doubts, but he refused to let fear or judgment dictate his actions. Every step he took on the ranch was measured, thoughtful, and full of purpose. And deep down, Jacob knew that one day, his quiet labor would be recognized, not just by the town, but by anyone who believed in dedication, vision, and the courage to do something different. Jacob Miller had always been a man of quiet determination, but his curiosity and inventiveness had grown stronger over the months. What he was working on inside the barn was no ordinary project. It was something the town had never seen before. He knew the risks, and he also knew that most people would not understand his work at first. That was exactly why he kept it secret. He didn't want rumors or fear to stop him. His vision was bigger than skepticism. For weeks, Jacob had been collecting materials for his invention. Old pipes, wires, and bits of metal were carefully organized in the barn. There were tools hanging neatly on the walls, and a table covered with sketches and notes. Each note contained a plan, a calculation, or an adjustment he needed to make. Every night, Jacob would light a lantern and immerse himself in his work. He measured, cut, and assembled, often stopping to step back and think about how the pieces fit together. The work was painstaking, but Jacob loved every moment of it. The townspeople continued to watch him from a distance, whispering their speculations. Some thought he was simply repairing an old machine. Others imagined something far stranger. "I bet he's trying to make a new type of tractor," one farmer suggested, though no one really believed it. "Or maybe he's building some sort of strange machine we can't even understand," another said. Children often pressed their faces against the wooden fence at the edge of his property, hoping to see sparks, lights, or moving shadows inside the barn. Jacob noticed them sometimes, and although he didn't speak, he smiled faintly to himself. Their curiosity reminded him of the wonder he felt as a child, when everything seemed possible if you just tried. Jacob's evenings were long and sometimes lonely. His only companions were the occasional barn cat that wandered in or the distant sound of crickets and frogs outside. But he welcomed the solitude because it allowed him to focus. He often talked to himself while working, muttering plans, reminders, and sometimes even encouragement. "Almost there," he would whisper when something didn't fit perfectly. "Just a little adjustment and it will work." His hands were rough from hours of labor, and his face was streaked with sweat and dirt, but his eyes shone with determination. There were nights when he worried about the consequences. "What if someone sees this and misunderstands it?" he asked himself quietly. "What if it brings trouble instead of help?" But every time that fear arose, Jacob reminded himself of why he started. The town needed better ways to manage their farms, especially during dry summers. Water was always scarce, crops often failed, and families sometimes struggled to make ends meet. Jacob had seen neighbors lose their harvests and heard the sadness in their voices. That was the true reason he worked so hard. If he could find a way to help, it would be worth every risk. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the hills, Jacob stepped outside the barn to stretch. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. He looked over his fields and thought about the town beyond them. He imagined people walking through the streets, laughing, shopping, and living their ordinary lives. Soon, he thought, they might have a reason to celebrate something extraordinary, something that started quietly, right here on his ranch. The thought gave him energy, and he went back to the barn with renewed determination. Inside the barn, Jacob carefully tested each part of his invention. There were moments of frustration when a pipe didn't fit, a wheel wouldn't turn, or a mechanism jammed. But he never gave up. Every failure was a lesson. He adjusted, rewired, and tried again. Hours passed, and the barn was filled with the soft hum of machines, the metallic clink of tools, and the occasional spark of welding. Even the animals in the nearby pen seemed to notice the energy, raising their heads curiously, listening to the unusual sounds. Word about Jacob's project slowly began to leak out. One neighbor, curious and unable to resist, walked by the fence one afternoon and caught a glimpse of glowing lights and moving parts through the barn's open door. He hurried back to town, telling everyone he had seen something incredible. The story spread quickly. Soon, half the town was buzzing with curiosity. Some were skeptical, assuming it was a trick or a misunderstanding. Others were excited, eager to find out what the quiet rancher had been up to all this time. Despite the growing attention, Jacob remained focused. He avoided the distractions, knowing that the right time to reveal his work was not yet. He carefully documented every step, making sure that the invention would work as he intended. He even tested small prototypes in secret, adjusting mechanisms and experimenting with different designs. Nights were long, but he welcomed the challenge. Sleep could wait. The vision he had in mind was too important to put aside. Sometimes the pressure became intense. Jacob knew that if someone interfered or misunderstood his intentions, it could ruin everything. The warnings of townspeople echoed in his mind. Don't do it, someone might see. But he refused to let fear dictate his actions. He reminded himself that true progress often required courage. Innovation always involved risk. And more than anything, he wanted to make a difference, not for fame, not for praise, but for the people and land he loved. Children became his silent audience. They would peek at the barn from a distance, whispering excitedly about what they thought was happening inside. Maybe he's building a flying machine, one would say. Or a robot, another exclaimed. Jacob sometimes smiled, thinking about how imagination can see beyond what is immediately visible. He didn't stop them from watching. In fact, he was secretly glad. Their curiosity reminded him why discovery mattered. Every invention, every breakthrough, started with wonder. Jacob's dedication began to inspire those who were brave enough to notice. A few older farmers, curious but cautious, visited him in secret. They asked questions, offered advice, and sometimes just watched quietly. They didn't always understand the mechanics, but they admired the patience and determination he displayed. Slowly, Jacob realized that his vision might not be entirely solitary. There were people willing to support him if they could see the results. One particularly late night, as Jacob worked under the soft light of the lantern, a loud crack echoed from outside. A tree branch had fallen during a summer storm, narrowly missing the barn. Jacob paused, heart racing, thankful that the damage was minor. He realized how delicate his work was and how easily months of effort could be disrupted. But he also felt a renewed determination. Nature might be unpredictable and people might be skeptical, but he would not let anything stop him. The invention had to be completed, and he knew that the benefits would speak louder than any fear or doubt. Jacob's nights blurred into weeks of continuous effort. Every detail mattered, every pipe, every wire, every gear. His dedication was not just about the invention itself. It was about showing the town that courage, hard work, and careful planning could create something extraordinary. He had learned from life on the ranch that patience and persistence always paid off. And this project, more than anything he had ever attempted, was a test of both. Finally, after countless nights of hard work, frustration, and trial and error, Jacob reached a point where he knew he was close. The invention was almost complete. Every piece was in place, and he could feel it. It had potential. The excitement that had been building inside him for months now felt tangible. But Jacob also knew that revealing it too soon could invite misunderstanding. He decided to wait, to refine, and to make sure that when the town finally saw his work, they would see its value. The barn, once a quiet place of wood, hay, and tools, now held something extraordinary. The faint hum of machinery, the glow of lights, and the sense of purpose filled the air. Jacob stepped outside one last time before bed, looking at the stars above. He imagined the moment when the town would finally understand his vision, and how proud he would feel to have persevered despite doubt, fear, and skepticism. Jacob went to bed that night with a sense of calm and anticipation. He knew the next phase of his project would be even more challenging, but he was ready. He had learned patience, persistence, and the importance of believing in himself, even when no one else did. And somewhere in the distance, the town slept, unaware that their quiet rancher was about to do something that would change everything. The long summer days were passing, and Jacob Miller's secret project had grown closer to completion. Inside the barn, the faint hum of machinery had become stronger, more purposeful. Every pipe, wire, and lever was in its place, and Jacob could finally see the invention taking form. He felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. After months of hard work, sleepless nights, and countless small failures, the moment of truth was almost here. He knew that soon, the town would finally see what he had been working on, and that both exhilarated and terrified him. Jacob decided it was time to test the invention in private before showing anyone. He carefully arranged the final components, double-checked every connection, and stepped back. The barn was quiet except for the soft creak of the wooden beams and the occasional low moo from the cattle outside. He held his breath as he activated the mechanism. Slowly, it came to life. Pipes hissed gently, wheels turned smoothly, and a soft glow filled the barn. Jacob's heart raced with joy. For the first time, he saw that all of his work, the planning, the failures, and the endless adjustments, was coming together exactly as he had imagined. He spent the next few hours running the invention through small tests. Every adjustment he made brought him closer to perfection. He recorded notes, measured outputs, and observed carefully. The process was tedious, but Jacob loved it. There was a satisfaction in watching months of effort finally work. He smiled faintly, thinking about the townspeople who had doubted him, whispered about him, and sometimes laughed at him. Soon, they would see that his quiet, careful work had a purpose far greater than anyone could have imagined. Word of the mysterious barn had spread even further. Neighbors were more curious than ever. Some tried to catch glimpses of Jacob's work from the edge of the property. Others walked past his fence slowly, peeking through cracks or over gates. Rumors were everywhere. "I hear he's invented something that will change farming forever," one farmer whispered to another. "Do you really believe it?" the other asked. People laughed nervously, unsure whether to be excited or skeptical. Children, as always, were the most daring. They would sneak around the barn in the early evening, giggling quietly as they imagined fantastic possibilities, flying machines, robots, or magical tools that could make crops grow instantly. Jacob noticed them sometimes, but he didn't stop them. He knew that curiosity was natural, and it reminded him why discovery mattered. One evening, Jacob invited a few trusted friends to the barn. They were older farmers who had always admired his work ethic, though they didn't fully understand what he was building. "Jacob, are you sure this is safe?" one asked nervously. Another said, "What if people see it before it's ready?" Jacob smiled calmly. "It's almost ready," he said. "I just need to make sure it works perfectly first. Then you'll see why it's worth the wait." His friends watched as he activated the invention again, carefully explaining each step. Though they were still unsure about the details, they could feel the power of his vision and began to understand the potential of what he had created. As the days passed, the town's curiosity reached a peak. People who had never paid much attention to Jacob or his ranch suddenly found themselves talking about him. They speculated endlessly about what was happening inside the barn. Some were excited, imagining a new invention that could help everyone. Others were fearful, imagining machines that could malfunction or cause accidents. The local diner was filled with conversations about Jacob's secret project. Even the mayor, who rarely involved himself in small-town gossip, made inquiries, asking politely but carefully about what Jacob might be up to. Jacob, as always, remained focused, knowing that his invention would speak for itself when the time was right. Finally, the day came when Jacob knew the invention was ready for a full demonstration. He carefully prepared the barn, ensuring every detail was perfect. He cleared space for people to watch safely and set up a small area for his friends and neighbors. He sent word quietly, inviting those he trusted to see it first. Slowly, people began arriving, their faces filled with curiosity and a little doubt. Children peeked excitedly from the edges, unable to hide their excitement. Adults whispered nervously, some with skepticism, others with anticipation. Jacob welcomed them all with calm confidence. He began to explain his invention, step by step, without revealing every secret at once. "This is a system to help manage water for our farms," he said. "It's designed to make irrigation more efficient and prevent crops from drying out during the hottest months." People listened carefully, trying to understand the mechanics, the pipes, and the glowing components. Jacob demonstrated how water could flow through the system, reaching every field evenly and without waste. The demonstration was slow at first, allowing everyone to observe and learn. Children gasped with delight as they watched the water move effortlessly, and adults began to nod, slowly realizing the significance of what they were seeing. Some townspeople were skeptical at first. "Are you sure this will work?" one asked, looking doubtful. Jacob simply smiled. "I've tested it carefully," he replied. "It may seem strange, but it's designed to make a difference." Then he activated the system fully. Water flowed smoothly through the pipes, reaching areas of the field that had been dry for weeks. The audience watched in amazement as the barren soil seemed ready to thrive. Faces lit up with disbelief and joy. People who had doubted him began to cheer quietly, unable to contain their excitement. Jacob stood back, quietly satisfied, knowing that months of effort, patience, and determination had paid off. As news of the demonstration spread, the town's reaction became even more intense. The local newspaper published a story titled, "The Rancher Who Did the Impossible." People from neighboring towns visited to see the invention for themselves. Jacob, who had always preferred solitude, found himself surrounded by admirers, friends, and curious strangers. Yet he remained calm, explaining each detail with patience, answering questions carefully, and allowing people to see the results firsthand. The more they understood, the more they realized how significant his work truly was. Not everyone reacted positively at first. A few townspeople were nervous about the invention, worried about change or potential problems. Some argued about safety, regulations, or potential risks. Jacob listened to every concern, addressing them calmly and thoroughly. He knew that innovation always brought questions, and he welcomed them. By demonstrating transparency and patience, he gradually earned trust. Even the most skeptical observers began to see the wisdom and care behind his work. Children, of course, were the most thrilled. They ran around the barn, pointing at the moving water, the spinning wheels, and the glowing pipes. "It's like magic," one exclaimed. "It's better than I imagined," another said. Jacob smiled as he watched them, remembering his own childhood fascination with tinkering and discovery. Their excitement reminded him why he had persisted, why he had kept going despite fear, doubt, and endless challenges. The invention was more than a machine. It was a symbol of imagination, perseverance, and the courage to try something new. By the end of the day, the town had witnessed what Jacob had been working on for months. Their reactions ranged from amazement to admiration, from surprise to quiet reflection. The quiet rancher, once a mysterious figure at the edge of town, had proven that courage and hard work could create extraordinary results. People realized that innovation did not always come from experts or cities. It could come from someone willing to try, to learn, and to persevere in the face of doubt. Jacob knew this was only the beginning. The invention would need ongoing care, refinement, and attention. But the town's reaction filled him with confidence. He had not only created something remarkable, but he had also inspired others to think differently, to see possibilities where they had once seen limitations. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Jacob stood outside the barn and looked over his fields. The air was filled with a sense of accomplishment and hope. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to relax, knowing that the work he had done had truly made a difference. After Jacob Miller's invention had been revealed to the town, life on the ranch and in the town itself changed in ways no one could have predicted. At first, the excitement was overwhelming. People were amazed by what Jacob had created, a system that could efficiently manage water for farms, saving crops during dry months and making life easier for everyone. Children laughed and ran through the fields, pointing at the moving water and marveling at the machinery. Farmers began imagining how their own lands could benefit. Even the mayor had visited, nodding in quiet approval as he observed the ingenuity of Jacob's work. But with admiration came doubt. Not everyone was ready to accept something so new and unfamiliar. Some townspeople whispered about potential dangers, imagining what could happen if the system failed. "What if it floods the fields?" one farmer asked nervously. "Or what if it breaks and ruins everything we've worked for?" Others feared change itself. For decades, the town had relied on old methods, familiar routines, and predictable outcomes. Jacob's invention represented something entirely different, something that challenged the way they had always lived. Small arguments began to appear in conversations at the local diner. "We shouldn't trust it until we know it's completely safe," one man said, shaking his head. "Jacob means well, but machines like this can be dangerous," another replied. The debates grew louder each day, with some townspeople siding with Jacob, impressed by his work, while others remained skeptical and cautious. Even longtime friends who had once admired him began to question whether his ambition had gone too far. Jacob, however, remained calm. He understood the fears of others and did not dismiss them. He patiently explained how the system worked, showing step by step why it was safe, efficient, and designed to help rather than harm. He demonstrated controls, emergency shutoffs, and safety measures he had built into the design. Slowly, he began to win over even the most skeptical observers. His patience and knowledge reassured many, but a few people still lingered on the edges, unwilling to accept change so quickly. Meanwhile, news of the invention began to spread beyond the town. Reporters from neighboring towns came to see the ranch for themselves, writing articles and taking photographs. Some were curious, others critical, questioning whether a lone rancher could truly create something so effective. Jacob welcomed them with quiet dignity, explaining his methods, showing his tests, and allowing them to observe the system in action. Despite the attention, he remained focused on the original goal, helping the land, helping the farmers, and improving life in his community. The increased attention also brought a subtle tension among the townspeople. Some who had once laughed at Jacob now felt conflicted, unsure whether to admit their skepticism or embrace the change. "I never thought a quiet rancher could do something like this," one man said privately to a friend, "but now maybe I was wrong." Others, however, clung stubbornly to their doubts. Fear of the unknown can be a powerful force, and for some, accepting Jacob's work meant letting go of traditions and habits that had defined their lives for decades. Jacob noticed the growing tension and knew he had to act carefully. He organized a meeting at the town hall, inviting farmers, neighbors, and even local officials. He explained the invention in detail, answering questions patiently and encouraging dialogue. "I understand your concerns," he said. "Change can be difficult. But I promise, this system is designed to help everyone, not to cause harm. If we work together, we can make our farms stronger and our community more resilient." Some nodded in agreement, while others continued to listen with doubt. Even as he worked to calm the concerns, Jacob faced personal challenges. The long months of effort had taken a toll on him physically. His hands were sore, his back ached from bending over machines for hours, and sleepless nights had left faint dark circles under his eyes. Yet he never complained, knowing that the work he had done was bigger than any discomfort. Every obstacle he faced, every doubt expressed by the townspeople, strengthened his determination rather than weakening it. The situation reached a turning point when a dry spell threatened the surrounding farms. Crops were beginning to wilt, and farmers worried that the summer harvest would fail. This was the moment Jacob had been preparing for. He offered to run the system on a larger scale, showing how it could save the fields and benefit the town directly. Some skeptics hesitated, afraid of potential problems, but most agreed to let him try. The anticipation in the air was palpable. Jacob activated the system, carefully monitoring every flow of water, every pressure gauge, and every valve. Slowly but surely, the barren fields began to receive the moisture they desperately needed. Farmers watched in amazement as dry soil soaked up water efficiently, reviving plants that had been struggling for weeks. Children ran through the fields with joy, splashing in the small streams that flowed evenly across the land. Adults stared in disbelief, then slowly began to smile, realizing the practical impact of Jacob's invention. Even the skeptics had to admit that the results were undeniable. Crops that had been wilting were now thriving, and the town began to see the value of the innovation. Arguments subsided, replaced with quiet admiration. "I never thought I'd see something like this in our town," one farmer admitted, shaking his head. "Jacob really did it." Others nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had been accomplished. But as the success became clear, not everyone was pleased. A few individuals who were resistant to change became openly critical, claiming the invention was unnatural or that it might have unintended consequences. Local meetings sometimes became heated, with people arguing passionately about whether to embrace Jacob's innovation or stick to old methods. Jacob never lost his composure. He listened, explained, and invited people to observe the results for themselves. Slowly, reason began to prevail over fear, though the tension in the town was still noticeable. Throughout this period, Jacob remained humble. He never claimed personal credit or tried to use the invention for fame. To him, the goal was always the community, the land, and the future of the town. He continued to work tirelessly, adjusting, maintaining, and improving the system while also educating the farmers on how to use it effectively. His quiet leadership and dedication inspired others to take initiative, fostering a sense of collaboration that had been rare in the town before. Even the children who had once peeked at the barn in curiosity were now involved in small ways. They helped carry tools, fetch small materials, and watch the system in operation, learning about mechanics, responsibility, and the value of perseverance. Parents watched with pride as their children discovered the joy of learning through experience. The invention, once a secret, had now become a source of community engagement, education, and pride. By the end of the season, the town had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. People were more open to new ideas, more willing to try innovations, and more appreciative of courage and creativity. Jacob had not only saved the crops during a challenging time, but had also shown that progress is possible when someone has the vision and patience to see it through. The barn, once a place of mystery and whispers, had become a symbol of hope, ingenuity, and the power of doing what others fear to attempt. Jacob himself felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The arguments, doubts, and challenges had not deterred him. He had faced skepticism, criticism, and fear, yet he had remained steadfast. Watching the town slowly embrace the invention filled him with pride, not pride in himself, but in the community he had helped unite and inspire. It was a lesson that progress is never simple, but with persistence, patience, and humility, it is always possible. As the sun set over the hills one evening, Jacob walked through the fields, watching the thriving crops and the small streams flowing evenly across the land. Children laughed in the distance, farmers discussed improvements, and the town slowly settled into a new rhythm. Jacob knew that challenges would continue to arise, but he was ready for them. He had learned that courage, vision, and careful work could overcome fear, doubt, and resistance. And in that quiet moment, standing among the fields he had nurtured and protected, Jacob felt a deep connection to the land, the town, and the future he had helped shape. By the time the next season arrived, the entire town had begun to see the true impact of Jacob Miller's invention. What had once been a secret, mysterious project hidden in the barn at the edge of town was now a symbol of hope, innovation, and perseverance. Farmers walked through their fields with renewed confidence, observing how evenly water reached every part of the land. Crops that had struggled in the harsh sun were now thriving, producing fruits and grains beyond what anyone had imagined. Children ran through the fields, their laughter carrying across the hills, reflecting a sense of joy and possibility that had spread throughout the town. Jacob watched all of this quietly, standing near the edge of his fields with the familiar warmth of the sun on his back. He had never sought attention or recognition for his work. His goal had always been simple: to help the land and the people who depended on it. Yet, seeing the positive changes, he couldn't help but feel a quiet pride, not in himself, but in the way the town had embraced progress and adaptation. People who had once doubted him now approached with gratitude and curiosity. Even the skeptics, those who had voiced concerns or feared change, had begun to admit the value of his invention. As the town slowly settled into this new reality, the sense of excitement transformed into practical application. Farmers began asking Jacob to help them adapt the system to their own lands. He patiently guided them, teaching them how to use the machinery safely and efficiently. Step by step, field by field, the town's agricultural productivity improved. Water shortages were no longer a looming threat, and families who had previously worried about failed harvests now looked forward to abundant seasons. The community began to thrive in a way it hadn't in decades, all because one quiet rancher had dared to imagine a solution and act upon it. Children, especially, were captivated by Jacob's work. They had watched him labor night after night, seen his determination, and witnessed the results of his efforts. They were inspired in ways that words could hardly describe. Some began tinkering themselves, taking apart small machines, experimenting with simple inventions, and learning through curiosity. Parents noticed the change and encouraged it, realizing that Jacob had not only improved the town's land but had also sparked creativity and ambition in the next generation. His influence reached far beyond irrigation systems. It touched imagination, courage, and learning. The local school even began organizing visits to the ranch. Teachers brought students to see the invention in operation, explaining the principles behind it and showing how practical solutions could solve real-world problems. Jacob, always patient and humble, welcomed the children and teachers alike. He answered their questions, demonstrated the system, and even allowed them to assist with small, safe tasks. The experience inspired many students, showing them that innovation and dedication could come from anyone, anywhere, regardless of age or background. Meanwhile, the town's social dynamic shifted. People who had been resistant to change began to see the benefits of embracing new ideas. Community meetings, which had previously been filled with debate and skepticism, now became opportunities for learning and collaboration. Farmers shared tips, children demonstrated small experiments, and adults discussed ways to improve efficiency across the community. The invention had created not only practical improvements but a renewed sense of unity and optimism. Jacob's quiet leadership had shown that courage, vision, and determination could inspire more than just results. They could inspire a community. Jacob, however, never let the attention or accolades distract him. Each day he walked through his fields, checking the water flow, observing the crops, and making small adjustments to improve the system. He continued refining the machinery, testing new ideas, and ensuring that every farm benefited as much as possible. His work ethic had not changed, only the scale of its impact had grown. He remained as humble and methodical as ever, knowing that true success came not from praise, but from the satisfaction of a task well done and a community helped. Even the town's leaders began to acknowledge the significance of Jacob's contribution. The mayor organized a small ceremony at the town square to honor the positive impact of his work. While Jacob did not seek recognition, he accepted the gesture with quiet gratitude. He spoke briefly to the gathered townspeople, emphasizing collaboration, patience, and the importance of believing in solutions even when others may doubt them. "This is not just my work," he said. "It belongs to all of us because we are all part of this land, this town, and this community. Together, we can achieve more than we ever imagined." The crowd listened in respectful silence, many moved by the humility and vision of the quiet rancher they had once misunderstood. The invention also attracted attention from neighboring towns. Visitors came to learn from Jacob's methods, hoping to adapt the system to their own communities. Jacob welcomed them as well, demonstrating his techniques, explaining the process, and sharing his philosophy. That patience, observation, and persistence were as important as the invention itself. Through these efforts, Jacob's work began to have a wider impact, showing that even a single determined individual could make a difference far beyond their immediate surroundings. Over time, the ranch itself became a place of inspiration. The barn, once a quiet and secretive space, now hosted demonstrations, learning sessions, and experiments. Jacob encouraged young people and adults alike to explore their creativity, to question old methods, and to pursue ideas that could make life better. The ranch became a hub of learning, innovation, and community collaboration, a tangible reminder that courage and perseverance could transform not just fields, but lives. Despite all the attention and activity, Jacob maintained his quiet, humble approach to life. He continued his daily routines, rising early to check on the cattle, walking through the fields, and making careful notes about his observations. The recognition and praise never changed his focus. He remained dedicated to the land, the people, and the ongoing improvement of the invention. His life was a balance of hard work, thoughtful reflection, and quiet satisfaction. As the years passed, the town continued to prosper. Farmers relied on Jacob's system to maintain their fields, even during harsh summers. Children grew up learning the value of curiosity, experimentation, and hard work. Adults remembered the skepticism they once felt and realized that courage and vision often require patience and trust. Jacob's invention had not only solved a practical problem, but it also transformed the mindset of the entire community. The quiet rancher had shown them that progress is possible when fear is set aside, persistence is maintained, and hope is embraced. In the evenings, Jacob often sat on the porch of his farmhouse, watching the sun dip below the hills. The fields glowed in the fading light, watered evenly and thriving as he had envisioned. Children played in the distance, farmers spoke with confidence about their harvests, and neighbors smiled warmly as they passed by. Jacob felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his work had made a lasting difference. He had taken a risk, pursued a vision that others feared, and through patience and determination, he had transformed not just his land but the entire town. Jacob's story became a lesson for everyone. It was a reminder that even the quietest, most unassuming individuals could create extraordinary change if they had courage, perseverance, and a vision. It was proof that innovation often requires risk, that skepticism and fear are natural but can be overcome, and that the greatest impact often comes from dedication and careful work rather than loud recognition. Jacob's life became an example of what could be achieved when someone refused to give up, when they believed in their vision, and when they acted for the good of others. In the end, the town never forgot the quiet rancher who had defied expectations. Jacob Miller had done what others feared to attempt, and the result was a thriving community, stronger connections, and a renewed belief in possibility. The invention had changed their lives, yes, but it had also changed the way they thought, acted, and dreamed. Jacob's legacy was not just the machinery he had built, but the courage, vision, and perseverance that he had shown to the entire town. And so, life continued on the Miller Ranch. Crops flourished, the community thrived, and Jacob, the quiet rancher, continued his work with humility and purpose. The town had learned an invaluable lesson. Sometimes taking a risk, believing in yourself, and working quietly with determination can inspire an entire community. Jacob's story, once a secret hidden in a small barn, had become a living testament to the power of courage, patience, and vision. And in that quiet strength, the town had found not only innovation but hope, unity, and a brighter future for generations to come.